The former municipal bylaws still have their residential zoning. That's the big project that we're working on, is getting all of those zones into one bylaw. But we didn't want to miss the boat, so to speak, in those other areas. So we modified all of those zones across the whole city to do the additional low-density residential permissions. And we'll be working to incorporate all the lands into our comprehensive bylaw.
And how excited are developers?
I hope very excited.
Like when is this going to happen?
Good morning and welcome to the Building Hamilton Show with Ken Beekendam. It is brought to you by LegalSecondSuites.com, and you are listening to 900 CHML. Rick Samprin in with Ken. As always, get more out of your home and book a free consultation today online at LegalSecondSuites.com. Ken, good morning. How are you?
Yeah, Rick, it's great to be here again, like always with you. Super excited for today's show. Mm-hmm. We have two amazing guests with us here in the studio to talk about everything Hamilton, building Hamilton, planning for Hamilton's future, zoning bylaws, all the great stuff that helps build the city. And I'm super excited to have them with us today.
All right, let's introduce our special guest today. Steve Robichaud is the Chief Planner and Director of Planning. Steve, grab that mic. Say hello. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great. Nice to be here.
And you're sharing a microphone today. Might be a little awkward at times. We'll give you a little pause to fire that mic back and forth. Shannon McKie is the Manager of Zoning and Committee of Adjustment. I get that right?
Mouthful.
Yes,
mouthful,
it is.
Yes, yeah.
That's a lot of info on a business card. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Ken, you decided to bring these two people into the studio today to talk about how we're building this city. Give us, you're in the game, you're building units, you're building additional dwelling units, secondary dwelling units. How has your life kind of transformed through what's out there? What's available out there?
Yeah, we've talked about it previously on the show. Mm-hmm. Hamilton has done a lot of changes in the last, number of years, especially the last 2 years here. I've been kind of in the game for about 5 years helping create secondary dwelling units and ADUs in this city. And I'm telling you, my job has gotten much easier in the last couple of years. There's a lot, I'm at Committee of Adjustment a lot less with minor variances, especially, variances related to parking related issues, or, landscape area issues that were, triggered by trying to implement parking spaces. And so I'm very thankful from that perspective, being a private sector, designer, architect here to help create these units. It does make my job easier, which makes all of our job easier of trying to create housing in the city, which is fantastic to see. Yes, there's lots more work that we have to do still and always be working on. They say, once a zoning bylaw has been created, you're all of a sudden you're amending that bylaw because now you're seeing, the effect of that bylaw and changes that have to take place. So, it's a big topic. And what's nice is that, we have to encourage more dialogue between, the public sector, the municipal government, and the private sector, the private developers, homeowners, property owners, to keep that, we got to keep that conversation open to see, okay, what's working, what's not working, what things can we change and implement, and just to help create more housing in the city. So it's awesome.
Steve, when you hear that, was that a goal of yours and your department to say, hey, we need to make the rules easier or maybe fewer rules?
Yes and no.
Okay.
In some cases, as it relates to, say, secondary dwelling units, the former city of Hamilton has a long history going back to 1973 in allowing secondary dwelling units. Some of the other communities, though, did not allow them at all. So one of the first tasks we had was to harmonize the regulations across the city. And then we do say that the zoning bylaw is a living document, so we want to sort of beta test it and apply it as we monitor people's experiences applying for building permits, how many times they're going to the Committee of Adjustment, and why are they going to the Committee of Adjustment, and then revisit those regulations. So Shannon McKie and her team have been doing an excellent job in monitoring that and bringing forward those incremental changes as required. In addition, we also had to respond to changing provincial legislation.
Right.
Originally it was only one secondary dwelling unit was permitted. The province came back and said, no, it's going to be 3 units on a property. And then we had to take a look at, was that going to be a triplex? Would it be a duplex with a laneway house? Would it be a single unit and a laneway house? Could you convert the laneway house into 2 units? So we wanted to have those conversations and make sure that it's an evolving, living, dynamic document, the zoning bylaw, that responds to our customers' needs, as well as balancing the city's perspective in terms of ensuring that we're looking at the bigger picture and not creating unintended consequences like parking spillover issues, privacy overlook issues, loss of trees or other vegetation issues, et cetera, et cetera. And part of the reason why we said we're going to allow you to convert an existing dwelling to up to 4 units, because that's much easier. You're not having those physical changes you would if you were to knock down a building and put up a new building. So, and we were listening to people because very often the concerns that people have, you have to be empathetic to those concerns and understand why are the residents or neighbors opposed to something. It's maybe the unknown. It may be a property standards issue. They just don't understand. And it is change. They've been in their house for a long time and suddenly they see a house now, there's a duplex going up or a triplex. And they, listening and explaining to the residents why that change is important for the city of Hamilton.
Shannon, you heard some positive feedback from Ken. Are you hearing more of that from other individuals like Ken?
Yes, certainly since we made the changes last year, we had initially implemented the additional dwelling unit regulations, and then we closely monitored them through the Committee of Adjustment process. So we were understanding what the quantities of modifications were coming through. And so to make that active change and to have some positive change in those bylaws, we have heard that, a lot less going forward through that process. And that results in a lesser time, lesser fees associated with kind of the paperwork associated with the new dwelling units.
And Ken, you're able to create these spaces quicker as well. You're not going to a meeting every other day to say, hey, I need a variance here.
No, exactly. There's a lot less, I guess, engagement, if you will, before we make a formal building permit submission. So we're able to do things more as of right, which is great. And they have, I guess, been cleaning up or clarifying or making it easier to understand the bylaw, so that, residents, citizens, they know what to expect. Like I know the city has been, that they put out some guides, some second suite guides, some examples, to help people understand the expectations, if you will, when they're going to the city to make a building permit submission. So it's wonderful to see, it's an ever evolving thing. And as more units get implemented, as more property owners, implement these units, everybody is learning and trying to find, that happy balance, between regulation and, being able to allow people to do things as of right. So,
are you hearing from other partners or other companies that do similar work as you are and saying, wow, Hamilton is a great place to do this?
Yeah, like in our industry, the real estate investing industry, if you will, the design, build, construction industry, Hamilton definitely ranks very high as one of the easier municipalities to work with. There's, many other municipalities in this province that, aren't doing as great of a job, that do have a lot of, process-related issues, timelines, very long timelines to process applications, kind of these outdated zoning bylaw provisions that just make it very difficult to do things as of right. Brantford's a great municipality. Hamilton ranks very high. Kitchener has come a long way. Cambridge has come a long way, making it very easy. London, they have their issues, but they've also come a long way, especially on the zoning bylaw side. We have other municipalities like Burlington, which they have very their process is very difficult and very time consuming. So a lot of people don't like doing work in Burlington as far as construction and building permits, just because it's a little bit more difficult there. But so this is why I give great praise to Hamilton, because they have made a lot of changes, which makes it way easier.
By the way, I spoke with Burlington's mayor a couple of weeks ago, and she is committed to speeding up the process. So there's some good news if you're looking for a project in Burlington.
Yeah, great news.
But back to Steve. We heard a lot about we've had a lot of discussions about red tape and how we can kind of cut through that red tape at the municipal level. Has that been done? Is that an ongoing process?
It's an ongoing process.
Yep.
So we do have a continuous improvement team and a continuous improvement lens that we apply to our processes. So for the secondary dwelling units, we were hearing that there were barriers and we responded to updating the zoning regulations. Or sometimes it's people just don't know. So we do have a business facilitation group, which I consider like the 911 or the planning help desk. So if you're having an issue, that group can help you, working your way through City Hall. For the secondary dwelling units, we're in the process of creating a dedicated team of building staff and zoning staff that'll assist individuals when they come into the City Hall. They may have never done this before. They don't know what to expect. It may be they have a situation where they purchased a property and the conversion was done illegally, and then it's trying to figure out how to respond in that situation. But there's other elements where people consider it to be red tape, which are basic health and safety regulations that we can't deviate from. So there are some of the regulations we have. dealing with our fire department for the detached secondary dwelling units, ensuring that you can get back to the detached unit if there's ever an emergency, which does require certain building setbacks. Some people see that as red tape or a barrier, but then we have to balance that with health and safety considerations. So it's really listening to what people are saying. Is it the language in the zoning bylaw? Is it the application form, or is there some other barrier or concern? And is it a building code matter? Is it a health and safety matter? Or is it something that we can make that change? And part of that can be just simply educating both staff and from a customer service perspective, as well as the way we present the information to the public. So we're always prepared to listen and make those necessary adjustments.
With these, Shannon, with these new elements, cutting the red tape, are we seeing more and more people like Ken coming to the city to say, I'd like to have an additional dwelling unit or build a secondary dwelling unit?
Yeah, we didn't really know what the uptake of these developments would be as we kind of went through the incremental process to approving them, but we certainly have seen a steady increase, and it's only getting larger as the regulations become a little bit more usable, the process becomes a little bit more clear, and residents are doing it a little bit more actively. So yes, we have seen a significant increase in these types of developments, and we're starting to understand the importance they're going to play in meeting our intensification targets inside of our neighborhoods.
Right. Is it also a case of this is just the tip of the iceberg because we have a supply issue when it comes to homes and the rental market? Could this be the next big thing in this community, building these units to get people housed?
I think our job is to create as many options as there is possible within our existing residential neighborhoods. There's lots of opportunities on our major corridors for higher density residential development, but I think what we're prioritizing right now is the opportunity to do this in our neighborhoods so people can stay where they're living. They have access to different types of homes. Right. So I think that's the priority.
Ken, are you seeing that priority come to fruition here?
Yes and no. So, this is where me as a private sector, citizen, helping a lot of property owners create these units. On one hand, we have great changes happening in the city that have allowed more units to take place. But then on the other hand, we're seeing other types of regulations that really hamper someone's ability to add a unit, or just create a lot more, I guess, process or red tape, bureaucracy, whatever you want to call it. For instance, as an example, so we have these bylaws that allow these units, but then over here, we're creating rental licensing bylaws, short-term rental restrictions. We have increasing property taxes, water rates, you name it. It's a death by 1,000 cuts on one hand over here that make it very challenging. But then over here, on the other hand, it's very positive, right? And so we have this kind of this push and pull with different regulations, trying to create units, but then also trying to really kind of regulate units, which also slows down or really can inhibit the ability of creating a unit. Right. So it can be very challenging. It's definitely like a bit of a conflict, if you will.
There's a yin and yang for sure.
Yes.
We'll get to more of that when we come back here on the Building Hamilton Show with Ken Beekendam. It's brought to you by LegalSecondSuites.com. Get more out of your home and book a free consultation today online at LegalSecondSuites.com. You're listening to 900 CHML. Steve Robichaud is the Chief Planner and Director of Planning, and Shannon McKie is the Manager of Zoning and Committee of Adjustment. And we're talking about additional dwelling units, secondary dwelling units, and everything that goes under the sun, and just creating more units in this community. And Ken, you wanted to get into a specific topic as well.
Yeah, I just want to talk with these two here about what are some impending changes that the city is considering, looking at, maybe some bylaws that are kind of being drafted that will maybe help further encourage more units to be created or increase density across the city. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Shannon, you can go first.
Great. This is a great opportunity for me to talk about a project that we just launched, our residential zones project for our new city zoning bylaw. We're on our last phase of that bylaw being the residential. And so we're moving forward with revisions and improvements to the low density residential zoning, as well as introducing our mid-rise residential zoning. This is a project that's been long awaited by many.
Very excited over here.
It will see some changes that have already kind of been introduced into zoning bylaw 05200. So we have the full suite of low density residential permissions, singles, semis, duplex, up to street townhouses being permitted. We saw conversions being added last year, and what we're moving forward with is purpose-built multiplex regulations in our low-density residential zones across the whole city. What this did initially last year in August was simplified approximately 40 zones across the whole city that only permitted single detached dwellings. So we moved that marker last year to permit the full suite. And at the time, we were looking at the purpose-built triplex and fourplex, but we did really see a need to go into some consultation periods to talk to neighborhoods to understand what the priorities were there and to establish appropriate regulations to have these forms of development come into neighborhoods and fit in where, we already have development.
Right. Was the number one, sorry to interrupt, but was the number one concern traffic? Because we're adding more units, that means potentially more vehicles. Was that the top concern?
To be honest, it was more about the fit of these units in neighborhoods, understanding that these are infill developments. So we're putting new forms into a streetscape that already exists. And like we said, change is hard for residents, but we know that this form of development is required. So we did focus a lot of energy on what the look and feel would be like. And we are partnering with our colleagues in transportation planning who are looking at our citywide parking study.
And this is a great example. I had a property downtown Hamilton. It was zoned R1, R1A, actually small lot residential. And we did a lot severance on this particular land parcel. The existing 2.5-story century home, we could convert as a converted dwelling up to 4 units. Whereas on this new lot right next door that we just severed, we could only build a single detached with a secondary dwelling unit because it was new construction, because the converted dwelling bylaw only applied to existing dwellings. So here we have an example where one house can be 4 units, the other house could be 2 units, right? And so it doesn't quite jive, right? And so this is where, I'm excited to see some of these changes coming to like a multiplex bylaw, if you want to call it that, similar to what, Toronto has right now, which is really encouraging a lot of units to be created.
And Shannon, you mentioned there's 40 zones or 40 areas in the city. Are they all over the city?
Yeah, throughout the whole city. Okay. So all of the former municipal bylaws still have their residential zoning. That's the big project that we're working on, is getting all of those zones into one bylaw. But we didn't want to miss the boat, so to speak, in those other areas. So we modified all of those zones across the whole city to do the additional low-density residential permissions. And we'll be working to incorporate all the lands into our comprehensive bylaw.
And how excited are developers?
I hope very excited.
My next question was when is this going to happen?
Yeah. So we just launched our public consultation process at the beginning of November, where we've been out throughout the community to, I think, 8 different community centers. We were at Lime Ridge Mall a couple times promoting the project, bringing awareness to the project. Lots of people don't really understand what zoning is and how it affects them. So this was our move to really bring ourselves out into the community as opposed to asking the community to come to us for input. We'll be doing a little bit more in January, a little bit more formalized with actual public meetings where staff will be available to present the information and give more details.
So does this only apply to new buildings that are built in these zones, or can we also convert existing homes into triplexes, duplexes, whatever the case is?
Yeah, the permissions to convert into triplex or fourplexes were implemented last year in August. So these ones build on those initial conversion regulations to allow for the actual form to be built in the neighborhoods.
Okay. This transitions nicely into, and I'll ask Steve about this, about the Greenbelt. There was, as we know, a brouhaha, a kerfuffle with the provincial government and how they kind of executed this plan. And I know City Council all along wanted to build within as opposed to build out. We had that survey that went out to residents, and I think it was 80 or 90% said, let's build within. Now that you have that direction, and now that the provincial government is out the way, how quickly do you think these infill lots will get filled up?
You are correct. It's deja vu. 2 years ago, council made the 2 years ago, in November, council made the decision, no urban boundary expansion, directed staff to prepare the necessary official plan amendment that reflected that. We did that, and council adopted it in June. And then in November of 2022, the province amended that official plan amendment to add 2,200 hectares of land to the urban area. And then just recently, they reversed that decision. So it's the firm urban boundary is the decision of council. They reconfirmed that. And the draft provincial legislation respects council's decision. So we are seeing a lot of interest in intensification and redevelopment. We were just looking at some of the statistics from CMHC, and in the last 2 years, we've had 700 units created. That's actual units created through conversions, whether that be adding an accessory unit or converting surplus retail space above a store. So it's a very strong incentive. Council has been approving a significant number of development applications to allow for intensification to occur between what Planning Committee is approving and then we approve in terms of site plans. We're at about 10,000 to 12,000 units have been approved. Although in building permits, there's only about 4,000 units have been approved through issuance of building permits. So we're trying to figure out why aren't builders moving forward. We can lead a horse to water, but we can't make a horse drink. So one of the challenges, how do you ensure that those planning approvals get translated into actual units? Last Monday, I was at that provincial meeting with the Minister of Municipal Affairs had to talk about housing and housing in Ontario. And the Minister reiterated his commitment to bring forward a policy framework around use it or lose it. What would that look like? So that rather than developers getting a planning approval and not executing it for 20, 30, 40 years, and often that can have other implications if a road can't get extended through their property, servicing has to get extended through their property, and looking at either in an urban area, what would a use it or lose it look like versus in a greenfield area. So in terms of planning approvals, they're there and developers are coming forward to intensify and redevelop, underutilized sites. And whether it's the small scale secondary dwelling unit to, the mid-rise to the tall buildings, but then it's a question now of getting to actual bricks and mortar and working through that process. So we do try to streamline all of our planning approvals, but again, it is permission. I give you permission through zoning to build something. Site plan gives you permission to apply for a building permit, and a building permit gives you permission to build it. But it's still up to the developer as to whether or not they execute on those permissions.
In that use it or lose it scenario, we're talking about a timestamp, in 5, 10, whatever the time frame is. If something's not built, you're out of there.
It could be. So currently subdivisions, if it gets approved today, there's a 3-year sunset clause on it. Right. They have to apply to extend the approvals. Zoning doesn't have that. Once zoning is put in place, it's there until council decides to change the zoning. And it may not necessarily we want to take away those planning approvals, but it may be that we take away a sewer and water allocation so that we're not holding up another development, or maybe in the greenfield areas, we require that they grant us an easement or they allow for services to be extended across their property. So it'd be interesting to see how the province responds to this issue and what they come back in terms of this idea of use it or lose it legislation. I mean, the Affordable Housing Task Force from 2 or 3 years ago flagged it as an important issue. Right. We've identified it as an issue as well as other municipalities across Ontario. But on the, and it may simply be then working to create the market conditions as what is necessary in order to allow for that development to proceed. One of the most significant investments we're making is on the LRT. That's a multi-billion-dollar investment. That may be one of those enabling investments that will allow for development to proceed. In other cases, it may be they're just waiting for, infrastructure upgrades. We do know, like some of the neighborhoods around Battlefield Park, there's a need for a new trunk sewer in that area. But the developers are still proceeding with their planning approvals on the understanding that they might not be able to build for 3 to 5 years until we actually do that infrastructure upgrade and coordinate it with the landowners. So it's trying to really remove some of those blockages in the system in order to allow this development to occur. Thank you.
On that potential legislation, is there a timeline to implement that sort of timeline?
My understanding is, from the minister's comments, is that they are looking at an Housing Supply Action Plan Mark IV to be released in Q1 of 2024. And in that Mark IV Housing Supply Action Plan will be a discussion or proposed legislation around this use it or lose it, because they are hearing that planning is great, it's permissive, but if the infrastructure isn't there, if there's a reason why the infrastructure isn't being extended or other factors, that it does stop housing from being built and makes it very difficult for us as a municipality, because we provide those permissions, but it's up to the landowner to execute on those permissions. Right.
Ken, on the use it or lose it scenario, from a developer standpoint, is interest rates or rising interest rates the biggest hurdle right now?
Well, yeah, let's talk about the market conditions right now. Like, it is very challenging. I'm also a developer as well. I'm working on a 34-unit stacked townhouse development in the Brantford area. And, numbers are very tight. By the time you account for interest rates, your holding costs, cost of construction, price per square foot, like, it's very challenging to bring a product to market and actually be somewhat profitable on it, to really justify your time. and risk, the capital that you're putting up, there's got to be a reasonable expectation of return, right? And so we're seeing a lot of developments across the province that are just, they're being shelved right now just because the market conditions don't really allow for that development to go through and be profitable. Home prices have come down. We're seeing it on our development as well, our townhouses. We're seeing the average price of a townhouse coming down right now, which is great on one hand for a home buyer, but it's not great for the developers for them to have a somewhat profitable development, right? And at the end of the day, it's still, we still live in a capitalistic, society. There is a expectation to earn a profit. And I know some people don't like that word profit, it can have like this evil connotation to it. Yeah. But at the end of the day, people aren't going to put capital at risk and not expect a return, right. And yes, these large developments, they take a lot of capital, they take a lot of time. There's a lot of risk to associate with them because at any point on the process, it could get derailed. And that project may not get built for whatever reason, And then on one hand, we have still a lot of issues, which we talked about last month on the show with the landlord-tenant board, right? And a lot of, developers want to build purpose-built rentals, but there's not adequate protections there for them to actually collect that rent. It can be very challenging. Yeah. There's a lot of issues which we've talked about on the show. So yeah, it's the market, economics here in Ontario are very challenging. This is why we talked about it again on the show. There's a lot of investors, developers that are going down south, to the southern U.S. Sunbelt, where it's a lot more business-friendly, landlord-friendly environment. And unfortunately, capital, these days can move quite easily, across the border. And this is where, yes, we need more housing to be built here in Ontario, but there's a lot of challenges with building housing here in Ontario. And if we really want to get this stuff built, we gotta have proper incentives for the private property owner from like secondary dwelling unit perspective to make it attractive for them to do it on a very low scale, and we have also make it attractive to the larger developer to do it. I'm still advocating for a $40,000 no strings attached grant for a homeowner, an owner-occupied homeowner, to create a secondary dwelling unit in their home. You look at the costs of the government to implement an affordable housing unit, okay? New construction could be $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 per unit to create an affordable unit. Whereas, the average basement apartment costs maybe $120,000, $130,000, right? So you think if we gave more incentives to homeowners to create these units in their home, how many more units can we get created? Thousands and thousands and thousands. And it brings back financial power back to the people, right? We talked about this on the show before. My wife and I, we started out a little bungalow in Hamilton. We created a basement apartment in our home, a legal secondary dwelling unit. We rented it out to students from McMaster. That brought so much financial security into our life, right? And unfortunately, with developers these days, a lot of that financial power goes up to the big REITs, the big corporations, right, and is being robbed from the everyday property owner. So anyways, that's my little rant for today. That's my little rant.
We'll take a quick time out, and we come back. We'll talk a little bit more about additional dwelling units, secondary dwelling units in this community. Don't forget to get more out of your home. Book a free consultation today by going online to LegalSecondSuites.com. Rick Samprin with Ken Beekendam. This is the Building Hamilton Show with Ken Beekendam, brought to you by LegalSecondSuites.com, and you are listening to 900 CHML. Our special in-studio guest today, Steve Robichaud, Chief Planner and Director of Planning, and Shannon McKie, the Manager of Zoning and Committee of Adjustment. We're talking about, everything under the sun when it comes to legal second suites. And there's been a number of communities, including here in Hamilton, that have had conversations about converting empty office space, because you go to downtown Hamilton, you go to downtown Toronto, downtown Vancouver, a lot of office spaces are empty or emptier as compared to past years because of the pandemic. A lot of people working from home. What's the conversation like in Hamilton, Steve, in terms of utilizing this empty office space and converting it into dwelling units? Is it being done? Is it even being discussed?
Yes. So we do have a demonstration project we can point to. It happened at St. James Street by the GO bus station. They created those residential units out of two vacant office towers, and that was done early 2000s.
Okay.
So it has happened in the downtown where we've seen on a larger scale. Smaller scale, you see above the stores, where they convert the second or the third floor into residential dwelling units. In 2017, we undertook an update of the secondary plan for the downtown and updated the zoning regulations. So the planning permissions are there to allow either an office, all residential, or a combination of both. It's really now landowners or property owners making a decision, a business case. Does the economics make sense?
Right.
Some of the taller buildings, it may be more difficult from a building code perspective based on the size of the floor plate. But the smaller buildings where you have access to windows, where you can actually lend, it's easier to convert. Those landowners are starting to have that conversation with city staff about, does it make sense? Or are there any incentives available to do it? And then is it something that they want to do? So I think you may see it happening sooner than later in some of the more small to mid-sized buildings as opposed to the larger buildings. In addition to seeing along the main street, you're seeing like the Gore, those buildings in the Gore that are being sort of been in a state of flux for the last 5 to 10 years, moving forward, maintaining that ground floor commercial and then doing the residential above it and some of new construction, as well as the conversions occurring within the downtown.
Yeah, so our firm's involved in quite a few of these kind of commercial to residential conversions is what we call them. With some of these office buildings, especially the big, tall, multi-story, apartment or office towers, if you will, it can be very difficult from a building code perspective when it comes to the windows in particular, because if your building length to width ratio is not correct, you have all of this interior space within the building that truly can't be utilized for apartment dwellings because there's no access to windows, right? And the cost to still renovate the whole space can still be very, very costly. So it's very important when you're kind of assessing these buildings to make sure your building length to width ratio really allows for the proper unit count with your windows. What we love about commercial to residential conversions is we're not dealing with renovictions, or we're not dealing with existing tenants.
Right.
And in this city in particular, renovations is a very big topic. It's a very divisive topic, if you will. We're trying to create units, but we're not trying to displace people either. And what's nice about the commercial stuff is that oftentimes it can be vacant commercial space that's just sitting there, ripe to be redeveloped into apartment dwellings. And we don't have to go through a process of cash for keys or evicting tenants, for renovations. And yes, there's very legitimate reasons why a building may need to be vacant to undertake renovations, especially when it comes to, really outdated mechanical systems, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, all of that is behind the walls. You have to remove drywall, fire separations to get to those mechanicals. So yes, there's very legitimate reasons why a building needs to be vacant. But, it's amazing. So we've done quite a few. Actually, we're right in the midst of converting one right now. It used to be an old medical office building right on Barton Street downtown, 588 Barton Street. It's a project that I'm involved in as an owner. And we're converting it to 22 apartment units.
Wow. And
right in the heart of the city, right where we need more of these units. We're able to do that all as of right. We didn't need parking for that building. And it's basically a zero lot line building. There's no real extra space there on the property for parking. This building sat vacant for, I think it was 7 years. That this building sat vacant. And we came in, we bought the building, and now we're converting it, and we're well underway on construction. So it's a great thing, converting these commercial spaces into residential.
I think one of the other things we're seeing a lot more interest in is with the demolling or the redeveloping the old mall. So Eastgate Square is in for substantial, renovations and new residential units. Lime Ridge now has a residential rental building under construction or approved. We're seeing it at the mall at Upper James and Fennel. They came in for just starting the conversation with the city about adding residential units there. At Barton and Centennial, Smart Centers came rezoning to allow for new residential units to be created there. So there's probably going to be a lot more of that happening over the next 3 to 5 years in terms of new construction, as well as we're going to see, underutilized commercial space being converted to small-scale residential units. One of the things we didn't talk about is in 2017, we did all along the LRT corridor, we rezoned it to make it shovel-ready. In working with some of the property owners and having conversations, it may need a review and adding additional lands to that sort of LRT shovel-ready zoning. So we're having that conversation right now, as well as along each of the station stops. How can we pre-zone that area for additional residential units as of right, so that the property owners come in, they go straight to site plan, then building permit, or that conversion, and removing that uncertainty. I think going through that zoning process and possible community opposition, getting an appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal, that's all time and delay and adds cost to a project. Whereas if it can be pre-zoned, the city sets a very clear vision what we want to see there. Person purchases the property, they understand what the city's requirements are, they work their pro forma, hopefully, that they can make it go, and then they come in for their site plan and then their building permit. And that can be a very quick process if they're just going site plan, building permit, as opposed to a rezoning and potential opposition from an appeal. And often those appeals are because somebody's concerned about something, or that there's other factors at play that we don't always know, or it's hard to anticipate. In trying to resolve that, we make a requirement now that when someone is looking at a rezoning application, they meet with the community prior to making their application, and they document what they heard and how they've responded to it in their plans, because we do find that early public consultation and engagement can avoid some of those issues. Yeah. If you just get a letter in the mail from the city saying rezoning proposed in your backyard, it's like, eek, yeah, I have to oppose this. But it's less threatening if you can take your time, and then the landowner or the developer helps to educate what are they proposing and how they can respond to the issues, whether it's tree removals, parking, servicing, grading, stormwater management. All of those are valid concerns, and listening and responding to those issues, and then adjusting your development proposal and then submitting the application. In those cases, they go through planning committee without any controversy, and then the projects get built in fairly short order.
Yeah, that letter in the mail scenario usually brings about pitchforks and torches and community stress. Let's take a quick time out. We'll come back with some final thoughts on the Building Hamilton Show with Ken Beekendam, brought to you by LegalSecondSuites.com on 900 CHML. Pier H is, by all accounts, going to look outstanding once this project does begin and is eventually finalized. It has a mix of commercial and residential, a high-rise tower going up there. It sounds and looks like an exciting project. I know there's some people who are saying we don't want these high-rise towers on our waterfront, but still, it's going ahead. Is this the must-have? Does similar projects in the future must have the elements of what is going to happen on Pier 8?
I've always said at planning committee, density without design equals disaster. So I think that was part of the conversation with the community about a firm urban boundary, intensification, redevelopment, the importance of good design. So within Pier 8, there was a requirement for both a control architect as well as adherence with the urban design guidelines that were put in place. And then coming out of the OLT hearing process, a decision was made to investigate or explore the opportunity for one tall building on the site to create additional family-friendly units. Mm-hmm. In looking at how that process would play out, we put together a very unique process, and excellence in urban design, excellence in sustainability, excellence in placemaking were key considerations. But that's really when we start talking about a complete community, what people would like to see in their neighborhoods. What do they like about downtown Hamilton? What do they like about the historic neighborhoods, whether it's in Ancaster, Dundas, Westdale, and trying to replicate many of those elements into the new builds. So we're really looking at more in informing the zoning bylaw process as a design-driven exercise. And in Hamilton, climate change and green development standards are an important consideration. So Shannon and her team are working on developing green development standards, as well as working with our urban design group about the urban design guidelines that'll inform the zoning bylaws so people have an understanding of what will it look like. And I think that goes a long way in terms of community acceptance. A long time ago, the architect or the builder would put their name on the building, and we seem to have lost that, maybe because some of the buildings are not architecturally as significant as the older buildings, and really wanted to make sure that people feel that they have their input can be reflected in the final design, and their input is through these urban design standards and the zoning bylaw standards, and then allowing the architects to have a bit of creativity and creating excellent buildings in Hamilton.
We got about 45 seconds for each of you to answer this question. Shannon, we'll start with you because the microphone's in front of you. What part of the community do you feel is most exciting when it comes to building and seeing it just evolve into something amazing?
I'm a little tied to the LRT corridor.
Okay.
I was a lead on that transit-oriented corridor zoning that occurred in 2016 and does require an update, but I think I'm most excited to see how that transpires and contributes to the city's growth overall.
That should be exciting. Steve, the microphone over to you. What is the most exciting part of the city that you think is going to grow the best or just look the best in 10, 20 years from now?
I always say I have 3 children in terms of Hamilton. There's an urban, suburban, and a rural child. They're all unique. They have special needs, and sometimes one's misbehaving compared to another one, and you have to do that a little bit of a focus on it.
Right.
We've done a lot of effort and work in the urban area in the lower city. I think the one thing that we really haven't talked about is sort of the continued transformation of our waterfront and what is happening down there. So we've seen what's pending with the redevelopment of the former Stelco lands. DeFasco is now going to green steel. So I think the lower city is going to have another, like Barton Street, Cannon Street. Those areas, I think we're going to start seeing some transformation in those areas, but we still have to be sympathetic and manage the existing stock of affordable housing and dealing with the rent eviction issues, et cetera, et cetera. But that, I think, is going to be a really exciting area in the next 5 to 10 years to watch. In particular, I think Ottawa Street, with the LRT stop there, that area there is also going to be an important area going forward.
Ken, we got 1 minute. What are you most excited to see here in Hamilton?
Yeah, I'm really excited to see all of these different areas kind of get redeveloped, intensified. I'm here to advocate for the individual property owner, the homeowner, the owner-occupied homeowner. We are living in very tough times financially. Right. And so I'm still advocating for secondary dwellings to help people realize the financial stability that can come through when you have a rental suite in your home, the power that can bring you. So if you're listening and you want help trying to create a unit in your home, please reach out to me. I do zoning consultations, bylaw consultations, building code consultations all the time to help people realize the highest and best use for their property, not just a small little property owner, but even some of the larger developers who are looking at these commercial to residential conversions.
As the tagline goes, get more out of your home and book that free consultation today with Ken and his team online, LegalSecondSuites.com. Ken, thanks again for coming in. Shannon and Steve, appreciate your insight as well on this program. You've been listening to the Building Hamilton Show with Ken Beekendam, brought to you by LegalSecondSuites.com on 900 CHML.